There was a lot of stadium construction, a lot of stadium renovation that was involved. I remember you telling a story one time on a U.S. team bus back in the day when I was allowed to board the USA team bus.
Well, even then, we questioned whether or not we should.
These are the days when you go to a place like Nepal, getting taxis or getting from ground to ground in some of these remote locations were not the easiest things to do,
We
logistics
actually thought
wise.
we'd take the first bullet, so we welcomed you in Nepal.
So graciously, very graciously, yes, you magnanimously allowed me to board the team bus to and from the ground, which I was very grateful for. But one of the stories I remember you telling me that you had these workers who were not very well versed in cricket, and you drew up stadium design with what looked like a boundary line, and they started building an actual fence rather than just account for a boundary rope. They started to build a proper fence as if it was a baseball field, and you were tearing your hair out trying to get them. No, no, no. What they were starting to build up, you had to go back and make them redo it and take it back down because there were just some crazy kind of things that were lost in translation. So there was a whole lot of stress and chaos involved in getting things done for the 2007 World Cup. What do you remember most about that time span and that timeline? Like you said, there wasn't a whole lot of manpower when you were first brought on board. How did things unfold in that 5-year stretch from your perspective? And I guess if there's one stadium venue that you're most proud of helping to get built or renovated, what would it be?
I'll start by saying the story you just told, I'll finish it, is this cricket oval in Grenada. The World Cup experience is critical to it because the reason I was really selected is that for the 1994 FIFA World Cup in the United States, I was brought on in 1989, a few years into my starting my company, which I did officially in 1985. So by 1989, I'm now part of the FIFA US FIFA team, getting all the stadiums ready. That was my job. And one of them was to go around the United States. 28 cities had bid for the FIFA World Cup rights. And I was part of the team that helped select the final 9 stadiums for the FIFA World Cup in 94. And then I was part of the team and co-director of the team to actually get all the stadiums ready in time for the 94 FIFA World Cup, which, by the way, had a budget on our side of about $75 million because we basically took NFL stadiums and just had to do the temporary overlay. But that included putting a natural grass field on top of Giant Stadium in New Jersey, and it included putting natural grass fields in the Silver Dome, which didn't have any light. So we had to create a whole system that would be natural grass. And it was just really maybe the most wonderful experience I had to date. Working on the 94 FIFA World Cup might have been the highlight until cricket. So I said earlier that working at North Carolina as a coach was my master's degree in sports management. Well, I think I would hope that someone would give me an honorary PhD for the 6.5 years I spent in the Caribbean as the venue development director and chief operating officer of the '07 World Cup. It's the most challenging thing I've ever done, still to this day. It was an amazing opportunity. I loved every second of it, even though I tended to go to bed every night at 2 a.m. and got up at 6 a.m. I was so fearful that if I failed, my entire industry of being in sports management would be eradicated. I used to joke that I carried with me always a one-way ticket to Argentina in case I needed to make a quick and swift departure from somewhere, because I was very nervous about what we could do. And I did have the ICC kind of pushing me behind closed doors that, hey, if you don't think the West Indies can do this thing, we'll be happy to take it from them and give them a future World Cup. Maybe we move it to England or India. And I went with the attitude of maybe that was my job, to go and take the World Cup away from the West Indies. You know, if you fly around as you have and you go back to seeing the old stadiums that were there, the old Sabina Park, the old cricket ground in Antigua, Kensington Oval in its worst days. Countries that didn't even have a stadium. St. Kitts, St. Lucia didn't even have a stadium. Countries who thought they had a great stadium and were wrong. Trinidad and Guyana, just places of this nature. And then I had to think about it the way I saw a FIFA World Cup, great airports, the way you were handled through immigration, moving teams around, hotels, transportation, internet, medical facilities. If cricket was going to truly become more like a FIFA World Cup, I had to bring those things in. So when I took the job, every single day I was asked, yeah, but you're American. What do you know about cricket? I have become as big a cricket fan as I know. I go to the various cricket websites every day, even now. I'm a big fan of the sport. My phone has some of the greatest cell phone numbers on the planet, from cricket executives to some of the greatest players ever. I've made good friends in the sport, and I just love the game. To me, the 2020 game is more exciting than baseball. I can argue that any day. And as an American, I can explain the rules with salt and pepper shakers and glasses at a table, probably like you, to Americans who say, tell me about this sport. So I'm a big fan, but sure, did I ever play it? No. What was my job? My job was to make sure that from the cricket wicket to the broadcast compound and to where people stood in line for tickets was world class. The actual operations of the event and the game, I left that to cricket experts, and I sure had a great one in Michael Hall, who's still one of the executives for the T20 League in the Caribbean. So I knew I had cricket experts to run the games and make sure the teams were happy, but I wanted to make sure the stadiums were like none other. So in the end, we put out a manual somewhere on my desk or behind my bookshelf is a manual that was about 300 pages, and it basically said to governments, so you want to run a Cricket World Cup? Sign this document on page 300 and we'll give you a chance. And I made every country have to bid, therefore, for a chance. And I worked it out with the board. And the two things that I think I did smartly was I suggested to the ICC that the West Indies Cricket Board just focus on their own team, and that we would create a board of business people, maybe 2 from every island, who understood spreadsheets and dollar signs and transportation and hospitality and tourism and had political clout. And in that way, that was my board. And I think that was one of the smartest things I did early on with Chris Deering. And Chris Deering and I today are still great, great friends. And I really respected him as a person. But here I was, the big white American in the Caribbean in cricket. And I said, I was on the witness protection program. No one's going to find me. Who's going to look for a big white American in the West Indies in the sport of cricket? And so I was questioned every day. What do you know about the sport? But for 6.5 years, my job was to not look over my shoulder, but to look forward and try and figure out how do we develop a slew of venues that won't be white elephants, because I thought I saw a few white elephants in South Africa. So the very first thing I did was suggest to Chris, let's create an observer program. Let's bring 2 people from all the countries who want to bid and go to South Africa. And I made it my job to lead that delegation with Chris Deering and figure out who we would interview, what games we would see, what stadiums we would see, and try to learn from the best in the business in South Africa. So in 2003, we took about 20-something people on a 10-day tour and really, really learned a lot. And some countries went home and said, we can't do this. Cayman, for example, Anguilla, the Bahamas, for example, decided that they really shouldn't participate. And that left the rest of them, including the United States, who thought they would like to put in a bid. And you know what? The ICC was a little vague about who was hosting the World Cup. So they allowed Bermuda, Bahamas, and Cayman and other countries that were not really in the United States, who were not part of the West Indies cricket, to actually bid, just because they knew how difficult this was going to be. And they weren't really sure we could find 9 Caribbean countries who could actually host a World Cup. So they made it as difficult as possible. And I respected that. It gave me the challenge. So when I went on my tour to every single country for 2 or 3 days and met with every prime minister and tried to scare them into realizing that if we accept you, you have no clue what this is going to do to your country. Positively for tourism and business, it could be amazing. But if you mess it up, you'll probably never win re-election. And I would say that. And then I would also tell them I need your private personal cell phone number, because if there's ever a night that I have to call somebody to fix something in your country, I want you to be the first to know. So that's kind of the situation I was in. And in the end, when I nominated countries like St. Kitts, who didn't even have a stadium, as one of our finalists, when I suggested that St. Lucia and Barbados should be combined to be a semifinal final because they're so close to one another, St. Lucia never having a stadium before. The old guard of Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Guyana, and a little bit Antigua, were a little miffed by some of the things I did. I'm not really sure I'm allowed back in Guyana, as a matter of fact. Trinidad, I also had to go in and take the Brian Lara Stadium off grid because I knew it wouldn't be finished in time. There were things that I had to do that were very difficult. But go to your story. My proudest moment is that I believe in 2005, Hurricane Ivan came through the Caribbean and destroyed Grenada, the entire country. I mean, they got hit by a Category 5. They were completely devastated. The pictures that we were seeing, I was living in Jamaica, and by the way, it was a Hurricane 3 by the time it hit Jamaica, so I was stuck there. But the fact of the matter is Grenada was completely destroyed, and their cricket stadium completely collapsed. And Grenada had been selected because they were going to renovate their existing stadium. Now the question would be, could they in fact build a brand new one? I got a phone call 2 or 3 days after their hurricane. I'm not going to name names. I'll just say that I got told to go to Grenada and basically pull them out of the World Cup, to tell them that probably their matches would be moved to St. Vincent, maybe to Trinidad. But I also got a phone call from Keith Mitchell, the Prime Minister, who said, Don, when you can get to Grenada, please come and see me. I was actually flown to Grenada on a private jet because that's the only way you could get there. I landed and was picked up by British military and taken by helicopter to a British battleship of some kind out offshore where the government of Grenada was being housed because there was no building for them to be housed. And I met with Keith Mitchell, and I was told that he was going to leave in a few days for China to make a deal that China would come in and bail them out for the entire country, roads, hospitals, schools, housing, and a cricket stadium. And I said, Prime Minister, I mean, hospitals, yes, and roads and housing and government buildings, you need all that. Why would you even think about a cricket stadium right now? And he said, because I need to prove to the world that Grenada is alive and well, and I need tourists to come here in 2 years. Well, on my word, the ICC let us keep Grenada, and I didn't sleep for the next 2 years. And over the next 2 years, the Chinese sent 500 workers to Grenada to build the stadium that's there. There's a lot of funny stories, but the one you told is maybe the most hair-raising, and that is 6 weeks before the World Cup, I went there, and I used to give grades, A, B, C, D, F, or I did it by color, so it wasn't so schoolish. But I gave a red flag to Grenada and saying, you know, if you're not ready by my next inspection in 3 weeks with the ICC, we're going to have to remove. You've done a good job, but you're not far enough along the stadium. There's no way it's going to be finished. And we sat down with the Chinese, and they promised us it would be finished. Prime Minister Mitchell, you've got to let us keep this. And I just felt for them. I wanted it so badly for them. 3 weeks later, I show back up, Peter, and here's your story. The stadium is remarkable. I cannot believe what the Chinese and the Grenada workers did in 3 weeks. I was just shocked. Well, when I got there and I walked out onto the field, there was an 8-foot chain link fence being built where you and I would expect the rope to be. And I said, well, perhaps they're just protecting the field. No one should go onto the field. But I saw that the fence was not temporary. It was being poured in concrete. So I asked my Grenada associate, what's going on here? He goes, we don't know. And I said, get the Chinese here. And so sure enough, here come the Chinese with their interpreter and with their site plans. And they roll out the paper of grandstand, of the whole stadium planning. And I learned a really big lesson. You don't put temporary things on a construction because they think it's got to be built. So apparently one of the Chinese asked a Grenadian, what is this circle about 75 yards from the pit? And somebody said, oh, if you hit over it, it's 6 points. If you hit on the ground, it's 4. Well, they understood. They heard the if you hit it over. They looked at me and said, home run fence. I couldn't believe it. I said, I was so glad I was there. I said, gentlemen, you need to remove this immediately. This is a rope. And I realized, yeah, why would you have on a field, on a construction plan, something that was just a piece of rope that you would lay out on game day? So in reality, I used to joke that the Chinese were going to invent a new rule, and that was you build a fence, and it's an 8 points if you scored it. If you hit it over the fence. If you hit the fence, it was 6. If you hit it over, it was 8. You could get an 8 in Grenada. 3 weeks later, they put on an extraordinary set of matches, and just a tear in my eye again, showing up for the first game and seeing how Grenada had really just pulled themselves out of a horrible situation. But, you learn a lot of lessons on that. There are other stories. Chinese were not going to put in toilets. They just wanted to put the kind of Chinese hole in the ground in the bathrooms. I said, that won't work. They said, no, this is the Chinese way. I said, the Beijing Olympics are a few months away. If, in fact, they have holes in the ground, I'll understand it. But if they have real toilets in the Beijing Olympic Stadium for the Westerners, then you need to. Well, of course, the Beijing Olympic Stadium was built for the West. and we had to add toilets. There's just stories like that with weeks to go that you're just pulling your hair out. But you know what? In reality, we pulled it off, and that World Cup got finished. We had some extraordinary things happen to us, including, in my opinion, a murder of a coach from the Pakistan team, and I've got stories on that as well. But let's just say I got my PhD. There was a lot of lessons learned, both in construction of venues, of which we really ended up building extra venues. I did take a look and see what got done in places like Dominica, who was not one of our teams, and in Bermuda. I knew what was happening in Fort Lauderdale. But the long story is that the West Indies pulled off an amazing World Cup. The Sri Lanka-Australia final was a great one until it wasn't, because they didn't have lights. And Barbados had been told that it was an option. I kept telling them it was a requirement. Somehow we missed the word requirement, or option never seemed to be understood. But in the end, a great event. And to this day, the most remarkable achievement, I think, of my career.